We spent it better than you ever could, my mother said, and 30 people at my cousin's engagement dinner went quiet. By that point, my parents had already drained $186,000 from the court-protected settlement meant for my nursing school, used forged paperwork to close the account, and told our family I was unstable for asking where it went. Within 3 weeks, they had contacted my job, tried to poison my nursing program against me, and pushed me down to $46 in checking while my tuition deadline got closer. Then on a Tuesday evening in a church fellowship hall, a woman with a bank badge said 7 words that changed everything. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing where you're all listening from. My name is Samantha Reed. I'm 24 years old. Now let me take you back to Matthews, North Carolina, on October 14th, 2017. I was 17 the night a white pickup ran a red light on Independence Boulevard and folded the passenger side of my mother's Honda Civic inward, like thin metal around a candle. I still remember the smell after impact. Burned powder from the airbags, hot plastic, and the sharp copper taste that comes when your mouth fills with blood before you fully understand you are injured. I broke my collarbone, cracked 2 ribs, lost a little patch of memory, and spent 4 nights at Novant Presbyterian with fluorescent light pressing through my eyelids every time a nurse checked my pupils. 6 months later, after the insurance case settled, my father told me over meatloaf and canned green beans that $186,000 had been placed into a restricted account for my future, and my mother laid her hand over mine and said, "This pays for your start. We will guard it until you're ready." That was the sentence I trusted. That was the sentence they built the rest of the lie on. My mother, Karen Reed, knew how to sound like a woman protecting her child, even when she was really protecting herself. She worked front desk at a dental office in Mint Hill, always with perfect nails and a voice that got softer when she wanted to control the room. My father, David Reed, ran service calls for an HVAC company, came home smelling like Freon and old insulation, and had the kind of silence people mistake for decency. I did not anymore. But back then, I thought his quiet meant steadiness. And when he told me he was taking the settlement paperwork to Piedmont Federal Bank with a family friend named Elaine Porter, I believed every word that came out of his mouth. For years, I let myself be grateful in advance. I worked part-time, first at a grocery store and later as a medication aide at Brighton House Senior Living in Charlotte, and I never asked my parents for rent because I thought I had this one protected thing waiting for me. When I got accepted into the nursing program at Carolina's College of Health Sciences on March 3rd, 2025, I sat in my car outside the mailbox cluster at my apartment and cried so hard the acceptance packet shook in my hands. My deposit was due in 10 days. My first semester would cost $23,400 after aid. I called my mother from the parking lot and she screamed so loudly with excitement that 2 people walking a bulldog turned around and smiled at me. That is how long it took them to erase me. It started with celebration. It always does. The first delay sounded ordinary. My mother said Elaine was on vacation, and the bank needed 2 signatures because the account had been set up when I was a minor. Then my father said there had been a problem locating the old court order. Then my mother said the money had been moved into something safer during the pandemic, and they needed to unwind it without penalty. Every explanation arrived in a tone that implied I was rude for noticing the last one contradicted it. The only person who did not flinch when I repeated the excuses out loud was my friend Rachel Nguyen from Brighton House, who sat with me in the break room under the smell of reheated soup and bleach wipes and pushed a yellow legal pad toward me. On the top line, she wrote 3 words in block letters: date, amount, proof. Then she capped her pen and said, "You do not need to win the argument. You need the record." On April 17th, 2025, I took a half day from work, drove to the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. and paid $22 for a certified copy of the original minor settlement order. I stood in the hallway reading it with one hand pressed against a tan cinderblock wall because the room suddenly felt too narrow to breathe in. The order was plain. The money had been placed in a restricted account in my name, and any withdrawal required a judge's signature before the bank could release funds. No exceptions, no investment strategy, no family discretion, just a locked door with one legal key. I walked back into the spring sunlight with the paper sweating in my hand and knew for the first time that this was not a misunderstanding. This was a theft with paperwork. The next morning, I went to Piedmont Federal on Randolph Road wearing navy scrubs because I had come straight off shift and had not bothered changing. Elaine Porter came out from behind her desk the moment the teller used my name. She was 62, wore heavy gold hoops, and had known me since I was little enough to sit in the bank lobby drawing on deposit slips while my mother chatted. Her smile appeared too fast. She called me sweetheart 3 times in under a minute, and when I placed the court order in front of her, that smile moved off her face like a light being switched off in another room. She told me she could not discuss the account without my parents present. I pointed to my own name on the order. She said the file had been archived. I asked whether the account was still open. She said very softly, "Samantha, I think you should talk to your family before you make this ugly." She was not protecting them. She was protecting her position. That weekend, my cousin Amber hosted her engagement dinner in a private room at Maggiano's in South Park. There were 30 people there, maybe 31 if you count the toddler asleep across 2 banquet chairs near the back wall. The room smelled like garlic butter, red wine, and warm bread, and every female relative I had ever disappointed seemed to be seated within eyesight. I had barely touched my chicken piccata when my mother leaned back in her chair, lifted her water glass, and said in that calm church voice of hers, "Since Samantha is making such a fuss over old money, maybe we should all say what we are grateful for. I am grateful some people in this family know how to use resources wisely." I said nothing. My older aunt Linda Garrison, my father's 70-year-old aunt with silver hair sprayed into place and reading glasses on a gold chain, set down her fork and looked straight at my mother like she had just smelled smoke. Then my father cleared his throat, stared at his napkin, and my mother smiled at me and said, "We spent it better than you ever could." The room did not explode. That would have been easier. It went still in the small, sick way rooms do when everyone knows the line has been crossed and no one wants to be the first person to name it. My brother Tyler looked at the table. My cousin Amber started whispering to her fiancé. Someone near the breadbasket gave a nervous little laugh that died immediately. Aunt Linda turned toward me and said, quietly enough that only I heard it, "Keep eating, honey. Let liars work for their own fire." I put my fork down anyway because my hand had gone numb around it, and I asked one question. I asked, "How much did you take?" My mother looked almost bored when she answered, "All of it. And if you were half as grateful as we raised you to be, you would understand why." I left before dessert and sat in my car with the steering wheel pressing a hard circle into my forehead. At 10:16 that night, Rachel brought me a gas station coffee and a folder box with hanging files she had bought at Target on her way over. We sat in silence while the parking lot lights threw pale gold across my dashboard. Then she opened the first folder, wrote settlement on the tab, and started another one for contacts and another for lies. She did not tell me to calm down. She did not tell me everything happened for a reason. She only said, "Tomorrow we get the police report number. Monday we get a lawyer." That was the first moment I felt the floor return under my feet. The police report was filed on April 21st at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg substation on Freedom Drive. I brought the court order, my acceptance letter, screenshots of my parents' texts, and a page Rachel had typed with dates and names because she said crying wastes time in fluorescent buildings. The officer who took my statement was polite, tired, and careful not to promise anything. He wrote down that the disputed funds were $186,000, that the beneficiary account appeared to have been emptied without court approval, and that the possible offenses included forgery and financial exploitation. That same afternoon, I retained Michael Harper, a civil attorney in Dilworth, who wore gray suits that looked slept in and listened without interrupting. He asked me to repeat the exact words my mother used at dinner. When I did, he looked at the police report, tapped it once, and said, "People who feel safe do not confess in public." My parents escalated almost immediately. Over the next 5 days, 14 calls hit my phone from relatives I barely heard from at Christmas, all with the same message dressed in different voices. Let it go. Your parents sacrificed for you. Do not blow up the family over money. My mother told church friends I was having delayed mental health problems from the car wreck. She told my grandmother I had become obsessed and paranoid. She told Aunt Linda that I was angry because nursing school had rejected me, which was a lie so stupid it would have been funny if it had not already started working. On April 29th, my supervisor at Brighton House called me into her office and asked whether there was any truth to a report that I had been acting erratically around medication carts. My mother's voice had reached my job before lunch. I was placed on administrative leave for 3 shifts while they reviewed the accusation, and that was when the fear became practical. Rent was due in 5 days. My checking account had $46.19 in it after groceries and gas. My tuition deposit deadline was still approaching. I sat in my apartment kitchen under the humming yellow light over the stove with my stomach so tight it felt sewn shut. And Rachel stood at the counter stuffing certified mail receipts into a sandwich bag because the folder box was already too full. She did not look at me when she spoke. She just peeled one receipt from the roll and said, "You answer every lie once with paper. After that, silence is stronger." Michael sent certified letters to my parents, to Piedmont Federal, and to Elaine Porter personally. I froze my credit because my mother had every number she would need, and I had finally understood there was no line she would not cross. I forwarded my acceptance email and transcript directly to the nursing program's financial office before my parents could invent a story about me faking admission. Then, on May 6th, the dean's assistant called and asked whether I could come in that afternoon because someone had submitted an anonymous concern about my ethical fitness for clinical placement. It was written like a licensing complaint. They said I had diverted medication at work, falsified patient charting, and threatened family members for money. That is how long it took them to try to turn theft into character. If your own mother called your school and hinted you were stealing narcotics, would you still answer when she texted, "Are you coming to Sunday lunch?" Because I did. I looked at those 5 words on my screen for a full minute, and some childish part of me still thought maybe there was a version of this where she would get scared, tell the truth, and hand me back my life. There was not. There was only a longer record, so I sent one line back. I wrote, "Please direct all communication through my attorney." Then I took screenshots, emailed them to Michael, and drove to campus with my palms sweating against the wheel hard enough to leave crescent marks from my nails. The meeting at the nursing school lasted 43 minutes. I handed over proof of my clean employment file, proof that the complaint was anonymous, proof that I was the reporting victim in an open financial fraud case, and a letter from my supervisor stating no medication discrepancy had ever been connected to me. When I finished, the dean folded her hands and said, "Ms. Reed, whoever did this was trying to stain you before you entered the room." I thanked her, walked out into the May heat, and threw up in a hedge by the parking lot because relief can make you just as sick as fear. That evening, Michael called to say the bank had finally responded. 3 withdrawals had emptied the account over 14 months. $62,400 had been wired to Carolina Home Lending. $38,000 had gone to Reed Mechanical LLC, my brother Tyler's failing HVAC business. $24,612 had gone to a credit card processor, attached to my mother's dental office debts. The rest leaked out in cashier's checks and a final account closure. They had not spent it to save the family. They had spent it in pieces small enough to lie about later. By late June, the whole thing had developed that thick, ugly social pressure families call concern. My grandmother wanted a peace dinner. My uncle wanted a private sit-down between just the immediate five of us. Pastor Miles from my parents' church called and said reconciliation mattered more than legal outcomes. I was polite to every one of them. I thanked them for reaching out. I said the matter was with counsel. I never raised my voice. Quiet competence makes panicked people talk too much. And by then my mother was talking to anyone who would listen. She told one cousin I had pressured her for money to move in with a boyfriend. She told another I had always resented Tyler and wanted revenge because his business had needed help. She was not defending herself. She was auditioning witnesses. Michael kept building. The bank's internal audit found that Elaine Porter had processed restricted account withdrawals without any court authorization on 3 different dates and had notarized at least one signature that could not have been mine because I was clocked in at work 80 miles away that afternoon. Phone records showed my father had called Elaine 12 times in the week before the first transfer. Old mortgage statements matched the wire amount down to the cent. Tyler's business tax lien got satisfied 2 days after the second withdrawal. Every answer gave us a smaller, meaner truth. Rachel started color-coding the binder tabs with cheap neon flags and would hand me new documents without commentary, like she was passing instruments across an operating table. One night at 11:43, my father called from a blocked number, and when I answered, all I heard at first was his breathing and a baseball game somewhere in the background. He said, "Your mother thought we could put it back before you needed it." I did not answer. He kept going anyway. He said Tyler was drowning, the house was months behind, and once they took the first wire, everything after that got easier to justify because they were already guilty. His voice sounded small, almost embarrassed by itself. Then he said the one true thing he had probably avoided for years. He said, "I signed because I could not stand being the man who failed everybody at once." That did not redeem him. It only made him human for 30 seconds. I told him every future conversation would go through Michael, and I hung up while he was still trying to say my name. The reveal came because my mother's own appetite for public control outran her common sense. In early July, she pushed Pastor Miles to host a formal restoration meeting in the fellowship hall at church, so the family could stop gossiping and I could apologize for bringing lawyers into private matters. She wanted the same audience that had heard her version to watch me fold. 26 people showed up on July 15th at 6:30 in the evening, including my grandmother Tyler, 3 churchwomen who lived for a front-row scandal, and Aunt Linda in a navy pantsuit with a rhinestone dragonfly pin at her shoulder. Michael came with me and carried a worn leather briefcase. He told me in the parking lot, "You will not need to perform tonight. Let the record breathe." The room smelled like burnt coffee, old carpet, and the lemon cleaner they used on folding tables after funerals. My mother opened with prayer. Of course she did. She cried on the right words, dabbed the corners of her eyes, and said families could survive anything if people chose grace over greed. Then she asked me whether I was ready to tell the room I had misunderstood complex financial decisions made during a hard season. I said, no. That was all. Aunt Linda adjusted her glasses, looked directly at Pastor Miles, and said, "Then perhaps we should hear from the people with ledgers instead of the people with speeches." Michael stood up and set his briefcase on the table, but before he could open it, the side door clicked, and a woman in a dark blazer stepped in carrying a white document envelope and a slim laptop case. Her name was Andrea Collins, Regional Compliance Officer for Piedmont Federal. I knew it because she introduced herself to the room the way people do when they are very used to facts doing their work for them. She said she was there to deliver final notice of audit findings to the named parties and that Mr. Harper had requested witness acknowledgement because previous certified mail had been refused. She did not know my family. She did not care who was offended. She opened the envelope, read from the report, and every number landed like a plate breaking in a quiet house. On August 3rd, 2019, $62,400 transferred from the restricted beneficiary account ending in 4172 to Carolina Home Lending. On November 11th, 2019, $38,000 transferred to Reed Mechanical LLC. On January 8th, 2020, $48,986.13 were removed through cashier's checks and card payments, benefiting Karen Reed and David Reed. Then she read the sentence that changed the room. The beneficiary did not authorize these withdrawals. No one shouted. That was the best part. My mother went absolutely still, one hand half lifted off the table like she had forgotten what it was for. My father stared at the grain in the folding table as if he might disappear into it. Tyler whispered, "Mom," once, and then not again. Andrea kept reading, because this was just Tuesday to her. She noted that signature comparison found probable forgery, that Elaine Porter had been terminated, and that the matter had been referred to law enforcement and the bank's insurer. Then, almost as an afterthought, she looked at me and said, "Ms. Reed, your documentation log was exceptionally thorough. It is the reason this review was reopened after the first closure recommendation." She did not know what that meant in the room. She did not know she had just told every person there that I had not survived this by screaming louder. I had survived it by keeping the record. The meeting ended in the kind of silence you feel in your teeth. Pastor Miles tried to say something about prayer and process, but nobody was listening anymore. Aunt Linda folded her report copy, slid it into her purse, and stood up with the slow dignity of someone who had lived long enough to be unimpressed by family mythology. As she passed my mother, she said, "You called this stewardship. I call it stealing from your child." Then she put one hand on my shoulder and asked whether I had eaten, which nearly broke me more than anything else that night. Care feels so ordinary until you have gone without it for too long. After that, consequences moved without me touching them. Church women talk, and they talk fastest when paperwork is involved. Within a week, my mother was quietly removed from the finance committee. Pastor Miles called to apologize for using the word reconciliation when he should have used the word accountability. Tyler sent one text saying he had not known the money came from my settlement, only that Dad said it was a family loan to keep the company alive. I believed half of that, and no more. Elaine Porter resigned before the bank could announce anything further, and by August, the civil case was moving while detectives handled the criminal side. Nobody in Charlotte needed me to spread the story. My parents' own signatures had done that for me. The practical part took longer. The bank restored most of the funds through its insurer, though not all at once and not without forms that arrived smelling like toner and stale office air. Michael pushed for fees and damages. The nursing school gave me a short emergency extension, then a hardship grant after reviewing the case file. Brighton House cleared me completely and paid me for the suspended shifts because the allegation against me had been malicious and false. On the first day of classes, I sat in a lecture hall with a cheap blue pen, a stethoscope still stiff from the box, and a knot of anger under my ribs that no amount of success had dissolved. Winning quietly is still exhausting. It just lets you sleep after. I have not forgiven my mother. I want to be honest about that because convenient endings make for pretty stories and bad truth. Forgiveness has not arrived just because the documents did. There is no soft piano version of what she did to me. There is only distance, and a condition I keep to myself until I am asked. If either of my parents ever wants a real conversation, it begins with a full admission in plain language. Not a prayer, not a justification, not the phrase hard season. It begins with, "We stole your settlement." Until then, silence is not cruelty. It is structure. These days my chosen family looks small and ordinary, which is exactly what I wanted after so much theater. On Friday nights, Rachel comes over with takeout pho and still, out of habit, straightens the pile of mail on my counter into neat squares. Aunt Linda calls every other Sunday to ask whether I am sleeping enough and to tell me which cousin is pretending they always believed me. Sometimes we all sit on my apartment balcony in Charlotte with traffic hissing below us and cheap citronella candles fighting a losing battle against the summer air, and nobody asks me to perform healing for them. We eat. We laugh at stupid things. We plan regular life. That is what being chosen sounds like. If you are living through something like this, write everything down. Save the envelope. Keep the screenshot. Date the lie. People who count on your silence usually count on your disorganization too. Mine did, and they were wrong.